Look at this image, a $100 million aircraft, one of the most advanced machines ever built by human hands. Stealth technology so sophisticated it can slip through radar systems that have been engineered specifically to detect it, engines powerful enough to push it past the speed of sound before the pilot even reaches cruise altitude. Avionics so integrated that a single pilot in that cockpit has more situational awareness than an entire squadron had 20 years ago. Now imagine that aircraft sitting completely still. Not because it was shot down, not because the pilot was killed, not because the base it operates from was bombed into rubble. Sitting still because the fuel truck that was supposed to fill its tanks drove up empty. And the depot that fuel truck came from no longer exists, and neither does the one before it, and neither do the 18 others that formed the entire logistical backbone of one of the most powerful air forces on Earth. That image, a perfect aircraft going nowhere, is what I want you to hold in your mind for the next several minutes, because what happened in the Middle East recently cannot be understood through the lens of the combat footage that dominates the coverage. There were no dramatic dogfights, no missiles threading between scrambling interceptors, no moment that looked like what war is supposed to look like when it flashes across your screen. What happened was quieter, more methodical, and in terms of its strategic consequences, more devastating than any of those cinematic confrontations could have been. I have spent 3 decades studying how military power actually functions in the real world, not in the clean theoretical frameworks of war college seminars, but in the grinding, logistically dependent, operationally complex reality of sustained military campaigns. And the single most consistent finding across all of that analysis is this. The decisive blows in modern warfare are almost never the ones that make the front pages. They are the ones that destroy the systems that make the weapons on the front page usable. And what Iran executed against Israeli air power infrastructure was precisely that kind of blow, a strike not against the aircraft themselves, but against the invisible architecture of fuel, supply, and logistics that transforms a collection of expensive machines into an operational air force. 20 fuel depot facilities, every single one of them destroyed in a single operational night. 400 F-35 sorties canceled in one cycle, the IDF Chiefs of Staff relocating into hardened underground bunker infrastructure, and an air superiority vacuum opening over a region that has been organized around Israeli air dominance for 50 years. In the analysis that follows, I am going to walk you through exactly how Iran accomplished this, what the operational consequences actually mean at every level of Israeli military capability, what the bunker relocation of senior IDF leadership signals about how Israel's own commanders are assessing what just happened, and what the strategic implications are for every power in the region and beyond, that has been watching this unfold. Stay with me through this completely because the full picture is considerably more significant than any individual piece of it. The targeting problem that Iran solved to execute this campaign was not fundamentally a weapons problem. The missiles and munitions employed, a coordinated package of Caliber cruise missiles, Shahed loitering munitions, and Fatah ballistic missiles, were adequate to the destruction task. The genuinely difficult part, the part whose accomplishment represents the real strategic achievement of this campaign, was knowing exactly where to send those weapons. Because Israel's military fuel storage and distribution network was not designed to be found or destroyed easily. The 20 facilities that formed this network were developed over decades with geographic dispersal as a foundational design principle. They were spread across the northern, central, and southern sectors of the country precisely to ensure that no single strike or localized cluster of strikes could take down the entire system simultaneously. The individual facilities were built with overhead concealment, minimal surface signatures, and placement within existing industrial and commercial areas specifically to blend into the surrounding landscape and complicate identification through satellite imagery. Their precise locations were among the most carefully guarded operational security secrets in the entire IDF logistics architecture. So how did Iran's targeting database become comprehensive enough to support simultaneous strikes against all 20 of them? The answer is years of systematic, patient, multidiscipline intelligence collection that the Western analytical community had not publicly assessed as having reached this level of completion. Commercial satellite imagery was used not to photograph the facilities directly, but to track the movement patterns of military fuel tanker vehicles over time. The trucks that draw from depot locations and distribute to air bases create routing patterns. Those patterns, analyzed across months and years of observation, build a probabilistic map of where the sources of those routes must be located. Signals intelligence identified the electronic emissions associated with depot management systems and fuel quantity monitoring equipment. Human intelligence sources within Israel's commercial fuel sector, which interfaces with military logistics at multiple supply chain points, contributed location and operational data that cross-referenced and refined the technical collection picture. The result was a targeting database comprehensive enough not just to locate all 20 facilities, but to assign specific weapons to specific targets based on the hardening characteristics and destruction requirements of each one. The largest primary distribution hubs received Caliber cruise missiles with penetrating warheads designed to defeat reinforced concrete overhead protection before detonating. Medium-sized facilities received coordinated packages of Shahed jet-powered loitering munitions sufficient to destroy storage tanks, pumping infrastructure, and distribution manifolds. Smaller forward facilities received single-precision weapons and efficient allocation of a finite strike package against a comprehensive target set. Post-strike assessment confirmed destruction at 19 of the 20 targeted facilities within the first 2 hours. The 20th, located adjacent to a civilian hospital complex in a manner that constrained weapons employment parameters, sustained damage sufficient to render it non-operational. The practical result across the network was identical: total elimination of the fuel distribution capability that sustains Israeli Air Force operations. The fires burned simultaneously across the country for between 8 and 22 hours, depending on the fuel volume stored at each facility. The aggregate thermal signature was visible from low Earth orbit. The smoke columns from the largest hubs reached altitudes that disrupted civilian air traffic across the eastern Mediterranean for the following 18 hours. The physical scale of the destruction was impossible to conceal and impossible to misinterpret. The cancellation of 400 F-35 sorties in a single operational cycle is a number that requires context to carry its full weight. The F-35 within the IDF operational framework is not simply an aircraft. It is an integrated system of stealth characteristics, sensor fusion, electronic warfare capability, and precision strike capacity that performs functions nothing else in the Israeli inventory can replicate. Canceling 400 sorties does not mean 400 flights did not happen. It means 400 specific planned missions, each briefed, prepared, and assigned to targets, were stood down because the fuel to execute them did not exist. Roughly 35% of planned F-35 sorties in any operational cycle are dedicated to air superiority and defensive counter-air missions, the flights that maintain Israeli control of the airspace above its territory and the approaches to it. These provide the radar picture, the electronic warfare suppression, and the intercept capability that form the active defense layer above the passive missile defense systems. When those sorties are canceled, the defensive air picture degrades immediately and directly. Radar coverage gaps create windows through which incoming threats can approach without the warning time intercept systems need to engage effectively. Another 25% are dedicated to deep strike missions against high-value targets in Lebanon, Syria, and beyond, the offensive operations that degrade adversary capabilities before they can be used against Israeli territory. When 100 deep strike sorties are canceled in a single cycle, the targets those sorties were assigned to survive. Hezbollah rocket batteries that were scheduled to be struck remain operational. Iranian-supplied weapons storage facilities that were on the strike list remain intact. The compounding effect of canceled strike missions is not a temporary inconvenience. It is a systematic degradation of the deterrence posture that Israeli security architecture depends on. The intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance missions, approximately 20% of the sortie allocation, provide the targeting data and operational picture that inform every other element of IDF military planning. When those missions are canceled, the intelligence picture degrades at precisely the moment when adversary forces are most actively exploiting the vulnerability that the fuel destruction has created. Decision-making at every level of the command structure becomes less informed and less timely. The close air support missions, the remaining 20%, represent the most immediately consequential loss for ground forces. IDF ground operations doctrine is built on the assumption of continuous and responsive close air support from F-35s that can reach any point on the battlefield within minutes of a call. Ground force commanders plan their operations with that assumption embedded in every element of their tactical thinking. When the assumption disappears when the close air support request goes unanswered because the aircraft is sitting on a flight line with empty tanks, those commanders are operating in a tactical environment their planning did not prepare them for. The fuel reserve arithmetic that drove the sortie cancellation decision reflects a calculated triage rather than simple resource exhaustion. The decision to cancel 400 sorties was made because operational commanders managing the remaining base-held fuel inventory calculated that burning through it at normal sortie rates would produce total fuel exhaustion within 72 hours. Preserving a minimum operational reserve for the most critical defensive missions was judged strategically preferable to maintaining normal tempo for 72 hours and then having nothing at all. It is the decision of an Air Force that understands its situation and is choosing how to manage that situation as carefully as the situation permits. The decision of senior IDF leadership to relocate from above-ground command facilities into hardened underground bunker infrastructure is not a routine force protection measure and should not be read as one. It is a signal, one that the commanders making it understand will be interpreted as a signal, and the content of that signal reveals more about the IDF's actual strategic assessment than any official statement released since the campaign began. The Kirya compound in central Tel Aviv has been the command center for every major Israeli military operation for decades. Its abandonment in favor of hardened underground alternatives reflects a threat assessment that has crossed a specific threshold, the threshold at which senior leadership judges that the risk to command continuity from remaining above ground exceeds the operational costs of degraded communications, reduced staff capacity, and the psychological weight of conducting operations from a bunker. What produces that conclusion? The destruction of 20 fuel depots in a single night demonstrated that Iran's targeting database contains accurate location data for highly protected, dispersed military infrastructure spread across the entire country. The implication for the Kirya's own security, regardless of its hardening specifications, is not one that can be dismissed by reciting construction details. A precision-guided weapon delivered to within meters of a designated aim point does not negotiate with hardening specifications designed to defeat less capable systems. The bunker relocation also reflects a command continuity calculation. If the Kirya is struck while senior leadership is present, the disruption to IDF command and control at the highest level could be catastrophic and irreversible within the time frame of the current operational situation. Relocating underground preserves the people, the communication systems, and the decision-making capacity that the IDF needs to manage whatever comes next, regardless of what happens to the physical structures above ground. That American defense attaches and liaison officers relocated into those bunkers alongside their Israeli counterparts tells you that the American assessment of the threat level is consistent with Israel's own. When American military officers are underground with IDF Chiefs of Staff, the diplomatic language about ongoing assessments and developing options takes on a fundamentally different character. What this campaign ultimately demonstrates, and this is the part whose implications extend well beyond the immediate regional situation, is a proof of concept that every serious military planner on Earth is now incorporating into their thinking. Air superiority, the military capability that has underwritten American and Western power projection for 70 years, can be neutralized through logistics targeting that does not require defeating the aircraft themselves. Destroy a fighter jet, and you eliminate one aircraft. Destroy the fuel infrastructure sustaining an entire air force, and you eliminate every sortie that air force would have flown for as long as that infrastructure remains non-functional. Iran understood this principle and executed against it with a precision and comprehensiveness that no one in Tel Aviv or Washington had prepared for. In Beijing, military planners who have invested heavily in anti-access and area denial capabilities designed to prevent American air power from operating in the Western Pacific now have a real-world demonstration that a regional power can ground a superpower-backed air force through systematic fuel infrastructure destruction without engaging that air force in the air combat it was designed to win. That demonstration does not disappear when Israeli fuel trucks start running again. The Middle East that existed before this campaign was organized around the deterrent presence of a fully operational Israeli air force. The Middle East that exists now is organized around the knowledge that the operational foundation of that air force can be eliminated in a single night by an adversary with the precision weapons, the intelligence preparation, and the operational will to target it, and that knowledge, unlike the fuel depots themselves, cannot be rebuilt.